Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan in the background there. Here with a couple of things, but mostly I wanted to get the alpha fan theory in its own video. I've talked about this before, but I wanted to go into it more because recently I was watching The Fourth Age with your host RJ, who's very good, by the way. You should listen to him. He did this video called Contempt for Sci-Fi Fantasy Fans is the Norm. And I'd like to add a few thoughts to that, and I think it ties in well with the alpha fan theory. Now, what he basically said in his video, and I'm paraphrasing, but you should watch it anyway, is companies get to this point where they are literally hiring people specifically to have contempt for the franchises they're making. Which there are abundant examples right now, right? And what essentially drives that is this idea that progressives have to keep moving forward, and if anybody has respect for the old ways, they need to be kneecapped and eliminated because you can't have that. You know, they're gonna hold you up. They're gonna try to respect the traditions, essentially. Go into the video. He gets deep into it more, but I wanted to add a couple of thoughts to that and then give you the alpha fan theory, hopefully in a more coherent manner. One of the things companies do, especially entertainment companies, and this has been taken to the nth degree now, is to subvert your expectations. What that started as is, well, we need new blood, right? We need a new take. We need something new. And usually that was for franchises and characters and TV shows that had grown stale, right? Because they would run these TV shows, movies, franchises, whatever, into a ditch to the point at which they were doing the same thing over and over because, you know, they would turn it into product. It would be a can of peas over and over and over again. And you can add a little bit of salt in the can of peas, but if you come over and say, well, what if we change the peas to carrots? They go, whoa, no. Just keep doing a can of peas. Just variations on can of peas. We own can of peas. Well, I don't know what about carrots. I don't know anything about carrots. And that stifled creativity to a large degree, and creators would have to try to overcome it in weird, convoluted ways. Now, with the advent of woke and everything getting political, they have leaned into this idea of subverting expectations and doing things new again and again and again. And part of that was this idea that, well, everything's getting stale, our sales are down or they've plateaued, so the only thing to do is just throw over the chessboard and start the game over again, which would have been a good idea if the creators they hired and the woke idiots that currently run things actually had the ear of the fans and not just being ruthlessly devoted to their political ideology. That's really the issue there, I think. They are not devoted to any kind of fan, not even their own fan. I think they would they would push a bus full of their own fans into the river if they could get what they want. The fans aren't important. Nothing's important but the ideology. So, when you talk about fandom and versus, say, the corporation that's running everything, the corporate guys are going to, of course, squeeze out all the money they can. And just like what RJ said in his video, at the very end, they'll literally do anything, right? This is why Star Wars characters ended up on a pack of my bananas. Because it's a name. You want to put it on your bananas? Oh, sure. Oh, good, $10. That's what businesses do. They just pursue money. Money. Now, the overall lesson in this, though, I think, is that they are short-sighted in their pursuit of money. They're only pursuing the next quarter profits. And that's corporate America being very, very short-sighted. They're not thinking like 20 years down the road, building the company up to this, megalith. They're only thinking like, if I can get a few more quarters like this, I'll be unfireable. And once I'm unfireable, I'll gut the company in the short term for a few years, make insane amounts of money, and then I'll just leave and let the next guy worry about it. And that's what happened to Marvel to a large extent. They didn't gut the company. They flooded the market in an unsustainable way in order to squeeze as much profit out of it as possible before the whole thing collapsed. And then Marvel went into bankruptcy and had to be, saved. They don't think in terms of, well, where am I going to be 20 years? Because they're not going to be at that company 20 years from now. Nobody's going to be anywhere in 20 years. They're all hopping and jumping to other companies, sacrificing you and your workers and your product and your ideas. They'll sacrifice anything as long as it jumps them into the next level of money and stuff. And they don't care. What do they care? Oh, you didn't you leave a company that totally collapsed after you left? Yeah, so what? I made them a fortune before I did, though. Well, it was their fault. I mean, that's what they're going to say. And with the greed in the eyes of the guys hiring this shark. I mean, I worked for a guy who, that was his job. He would go into a company and he would tell you how to fire like every other worker, making the remaining workers work harder so you could, jack up your profits to insane levels, sell off all the assets, and then slowly eat the company from the inside until there was nothing left, or until you just sold off the whole thing. And, there is some merit in doing that for a company that is wasteful and stupid and making bad decisions. However, to a good company that's doing good work, that's making a good product, this is a negative, because you're removing that good product from the marketplace just to make a few bucks. And that's really the problem, that, in corporate America. But getting to the alpha fan theory. Sorry for the wind-up. The alpha fan, in any circle of friends, is going to be the biggest fan of something, right? So let's say you got a group of friends who are all into baseball. There's always one guy in that group who's the biggest baseball fan out of all of you, right? He's got the stats. Maybe he's got a bunch of sports memorabilia. He's the guy who gets the season tickets. He's the guy who organizes trips to the baseball park. And, you watch the World Series at his house, and he's got all this stuff, and he makes it a big event every year. You guys are fans of baseball too, but your friend is the biggest baseball fan. So, what happens in that dynamic? Well, if you have an argument over baseball player stats, let's say, or what player did what in what year, you may settle the argument by turning to your alpha fan friend and saying, yo, who did X, Y, and Z? And he settles it for you because you all acknowledge him as the biggest fan in your, group of stuff. The same thing is true with geeks. There are alpha fans, right? There are fans of, you look at Razor Fist, who's like the biggest Daredevil fan ever. He knows the comic series backwards and forwards. I would never challenge Razor Fist on Daredevil trivia. He would absolutely trounce me. However, on Simpsons trivia, back in my heyday, I'm a little rusty now, but I was top notch. You couldn't challenge me in Simpsons trivia. I could quote Simpsons all day long. I could tell you the episodes. Back in the day, I could tell you Patty and Selma's apartment number and little obscure things like that, because I just was such a huge, huge Simpsons fan, which is why I ended up writing a comic for it. So if something happens on The Simpsons in my group of friends, and I'm known as the Simpsons guy, they're going to ask me. So when The Simpsons go woke and people start talking about it, they're going to come to the alpha fan to say, hey, what's going on here? Is this a good thing? Should I be watching this? Is it worth getting Disney Plus so I could watch The Simpsons again? To which an alpha fan like myself is going to respond, Absolutely not. I don't even watch the damn show anymore. What? You're the biggest Simpsons fan in the world. Yeah, but since they've gone woke, they're unwatchable. It just makes me sad. And that has an impact not just on the one fan, not just on the alpha fan, but your entire crew. If that baseball fan, suddenly stops having World Series every year at his place, you're going to ask him, well, you're not having the World Series? He might say, no, I'm done with the MLB because of the whole Black Lives Matter thing, which I know a lot of sports fans have just boycotted sports altogether. They just cut it out of their life. You have to understand, these people, this was a reason for living half the time. And they're cutting out sports like, no, I'm done with carbs. I can't eat ice cream anymore. That's how bad it is. So, in the case of, and I hate to keep talking about this, but this is the most obvious example of He-Man. Yeah, He-Man, as I kept saying, was never any good. It was not a good show. It was a show we sort of laughed at the 80s. We kind of tolerated it. It was kind of okay. We always hated the animation. We made fun of it. But it had a charm about it that it made it tolerable and kind of like, oh yeah, He-Man. Yeah, he's around kind of way. But when you do what Kevin Smith does, in my opinion, what you do is the alpha fans who have been supporting He-Man for decades, as much as you're going to support a show like that. It's not Star Wars. They're going to be absolutely turned off by what he did. And the buzz. The buzz is incredibly negative. Now, that negative buzz does translate into more eyes on Kevin Smith, the product, articles about it and whatnot. And then, to some extent, people are going to, if they're not going to hate watch it, they're at least going to check it out to see, oh, what's all the hubbub? And that's a very short-term thing, right? It's a very short-term thing because your expectations rarely live up to the hype. And if you got negative expectations, well, that's just giving you a free pass to be disappointed. So if I got negative buzz going into He-Man, and I kind of want to not like it, and I'm kind of mad from what I've read, I'm gonna not like it. Now, there is something to be said for somebody who's more neutral about it, who goes in with low expectations and then sees something that's not too bad. My friend certainly did. She watched it and said, oh, it's not so bad. And really, it's not. I mean, I didn't have that much of an expectation of it myself because I never liked He-Man. And so I can acknowledge, yeah, I mean, the animation's really good. Actually, the writing's good. It's just not He-Man. It just flies in the face of He-Man, and it's just more woke garbage that I don't think the culture needs right now. And it would have been very easy to fix the issues that Kevin made for himself. If he had waited, if he had given us 4 or 5 episodes of regular He-Man, even just, if he had started the first episode and did super retro 80s He-Man with the lesson and everything, and then slowly over 3 or 4 episodes, it started to break down and we realized, well, who are these lessons for? And then it turns out, they're for the kingdom, but the people in the kingdom, they don't really listen to them. They consider the lessons being talked down to. You could have added on to what had gone before and say in the 80s. Although they had to revamp in the 2000s, so they were probably going off a lot on that. I didn't even see that. I mean, I didn't even know about it until this came out, which was part of the problem that Kevin and Netflix had. How do we get people to watch this thing? Well, they would have watched it for Kevin Smith, because I'm a fan of Kevin Smith, or at least I was, and so this kind of hurt his rep with me. So now I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna be watching Clerks 3 until I hear a lot about it. And now the critics are such shills. If I hear too much positive buzz, I'm gonna go, you know what? Probably lying. I'm not gonna see this damn movie. But when you screw the alpha fans, you end up screwing everybody. connected to it. And this strategy of like, well, we're going to subvert expectations, really what you're counting on is new alpha fans emerging. Which begs the question, well, why not just do something totally new then? I mean, they did a parody of He-Man on Fox, which was sort of live action and cartoon. Well, actually wasn't too bad. It wasn't great, but it wasn't too bad. You might as well have just done a whole Game of Thrones type thing and left He-Man out of it, you know? But, of course, business people need that. They need that brand. They need that guarantee they're going to make some money. Because even if this whole thing goes tits up, they made some money. Maybe that's why they only released 5 episodes. They wanted to see if they were going to make any money on this thing. They wanted to see if the views were going to be enough to justify the expense. And then they could have just canceled it if it was really a disaster. But all the buzz, well, I don't know, the bar's pretty low because Netflix has so many subscribers to begin with. And those subscribers are, now we don't have a situation in which the world can watch national news and hear that He-Man, He-Man fans have been betrayed. No, you have to stumble upon articles randomly on the internet, and the internet is being gamed to favor a guy like Kevin Smith now because he's in the system. He's in the Hollywood system. They're going to pay whatever platform they can, social media wise, to make sure the positive messages about He-Man get out. And the negative ones kind of go by the wayside or don't really get seen as much. Enough so there's a bit of a controversy, but ultimately, people are swayed when they look at a video and they say, oh, well, this video seems to be getting a lot of upvotes, or this video seems to be showing up in my feed again and again and again. Well, it must be important. Let me click on it. So, long term, screwing the alpha fan kills your entire fan base, in my view. Because the new fan base, and again, these guys that went for the woke fan base, they think the kids are so into being woke, like, oh yeah, let's destroy the patriarchy, everybody. I mean, this was a huge problem at Vertigo Comics back in DC days. I mean, they had, dark characters. And then they turned some of these dark characters into screeds for feminism. I remember when it happened with Transmetropolitan. Transmetropolitan was basically Hunter S. Thompson in the future. And it was a really fun comic. And it was in an imprint, a sci-fi imprint, and it was really the only comic that survived out of that. I think there was one other that survived a little longer, but basically Transmet was a huge hit. So huge, they rolled it into Vertigo to keep it going and got rid of the sci-fi imprint. The moment they rolled it into Vertigo, suddenly feminism. And it was the same character, but he was downgraded, and all the women characters were upgraded. I think I've talked about this before. There was a stripper character who was great in the old version, and she made a lot of mistakes, and she was a great character. And then suddenly they brought her back as this amazingly competent bodyguard who could kick butt, and she was strong and empowered from her experience. And I was like, what? No, that is a terrible transformation. And I lost interest in the comic, and I slowly just stopped reading it. And it's not always, specifically like, oh, they made this change, boom, I'm out. It's a slow sort of, that wasn't as good. I mean, I think my Rick and Morty review of Planetina, although there's rumors now, somebody told me that the entire season of Rick and Morty may be about evil Morty and how he became evil, which would solve a lot of problems in my view from a creative standpoint. That would, oh, okay, we weren't following the actual Morty, we were following evil Morty, therefore the actual Morty we know and love from a moral standpoint is safe. I don't think that's what they're doing. I think, unfortunately, the internet, to some degree, has ruined creators because, again, they're pursuing that subverting of expectations. And if it's on the internet, well, that's an expectation. We can't have that, so we have to go in another direction. But let me try to keep this focus on the alpha fan. So to wrap up, and to add what RJ said about He-Man and the corporations are not looking long-term on these brands. They're just looking to bring them back for a short time, squeeze all the nostalgia out of them, and then let them go. Who cares? The problem is, who in 20 years is going to be interested in a revamp of the Kevin Smith He-Man? There's not going to be enough of a fan base, in my view. They've killed that fan base. Now, the brand will probably still be around, and maybe you could get a guy like, I don't know, George R.R. Martin or someone like that, some big fantasy name to really pump it up if they wanted to spend some actual money and let people do something creative. And sometimes corporations do that. But they can't do this again, obviously. And this trend in 20 years will be so dead. People 20 years from now will be looking back, laughing at it, going, oh, yeah, right. 20 years ago they ruined He-Man just like they ruined everything else. Oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I didn't even watch He-Man and I felt bad for the fans. And then it'll be something else, whatever the current trend is. Because keep in mind, most people follow the trends because they feel like they're being left out. And how that pertains to the alpha fan is when you have these trends, there are alpha fans, but then there are some people who are the alpha trenders, right? And if you're an alpha trender, you're on top of the trend. And you may sort of overshadow the alpha fan, who's an actual fan, simply by like spending enough money, throwing enough parties, throwing enough social capital in that direction because you just want to be liked or whatever. So you could have, for instance, in the baseball analogy, you could have a guy who's the stat guy who really knows his stuff, but then you could have another guy just a little well off. He just keeps buying stuff. Just keeps buying everybody's way into this. And even as, he's only into it for a short time, right? The moment baseball becomes unimportant on the world stage, let's say, he's on to the next thing. That's the guy who's going to be pouring his money into Black Lives Matter because it was a hot thing in 2020, and then this year, who knows what he's putting his money into, putting his efforts into. He's probably one of those guys who no one likes anymore because he's picked up these politics and it's ruining him. But he's got to do it because he follows the trends. So I guess in a sense, the wokeness is grinding against the alpha fan in a lot of ways. Because if the alpha fan gets tarnished by wokeism, then everybody's going to kind of be tarnished by it because you're going to tend to follow that alpha fan until it gets untenable. So anyway, that's my alpha fan theory. It's not, I heard a lot of it before and I kind of polished it on my own. But again, make sure you check out The Fourth Age and RJ because his stuff is really cool.